Thanks for watching our presentation. This is Group 6, and we're discussing the polygraph. Speaking is Jordan, and discussing is Amelia, Dempsey, Megan, and Ivor. To begin is a brief overview of the topics being discussed. I will talk about the history of the polygraph, which includes the key thinkers and events that take place. Next is the accuracy of the polygraph tests and the pros and cons of using it. The question being asked is, can you really beat a polygraph test? We're going to use past examples of the use of polygraph tests in studies and compare the criminal justice system and the field of psychology's view on polygraphs. Media and the polygraphs will be discussed, as well as the polygraph tests within the criminal justice system. And then to conclude, the future of the polygraph tests will be involved. So what exactly is a polygraph? A polygraph is also known as a lie detector. It is a device that records bodily responses to interpret deceptive behavior. There are two types of polygraph tests. There's the counterintelligence examination, which is used normally by government officials and law enforcement. And the second one is the lifestyle polygraph examination, which is administered as a requirement for employment in certain fields. So who uses polygraphs? It was discussed that law enforcement, parole and probation officers, and attorneys use it, as well as just for general employment. So to begin, we're going to talk about the history of the polygraph. It will involve a brief timeline, including key thinkers involved, as well as events regarding the polygraph. A study conducted by Ekman and O'Sullivan in 1991 was titled The Wizards Project. The researchers studied the ability to detect people who were lying. They examined law enforcement officers, custom officials, and court judges. The researchers concluded that there are behaviors associated with deception, which revolve around gaze aversion, increased or decreased movement, longer and more frequent pauses, as well as slower speech rate, hesitations, and speech errors. They also concluded that the belief in lying explains why most of us are poor at detecting it. The first key thinker I will be talking about is William Marston. Marston was reportedly stimulated by his wife's observation that her blood pressure rose when she got angry or excited. He conducted a lie test, which looks at blood pressure being measured intermittently during questioning using a standard blood pressure and use of a cuff stethoscope. I think that's what's in the bottom picture. He reported a high positive amount of correlation between lying and the change in systolic blood pressure. Marston also claimed to have discovered a specific lie response in predicting the means of distinguishing truth-telling from deception. This relates to him being the creator of a Wonder Woman comic strip using the magic lasso, which forces all who encircles it to tell the truth. Marston also appeared in a razor blade advertisement in which his lie detector test uncovered the men's true feelings about shaving ads. He discovered that the advertisers' blades were the preferred product to use. Another example is when he appeared in a magazine where the lie detector test in regards to marriage guidance counseling in a means to determine a wife's trustworthiness. He used it to compare her reaction from a kiss from her husband and then that of an attractive stranger. The next key thinker I will be discussing is named John Larson. Larson was influenced by Marston's claims and antics. He commended research in blood pressure and respiratory changes during a police questioning. He created the first modern polygraph instrument in 1921. This was the device that had mad stimulus recordings on paper of the 3 psychological processes, which include blood pressure, pulse rate, and respiration. The polygraph got its name by the writing of the 3 psych processes. He reported a number of successes with his device, involving 38 college girls living in the same sorority. He conducted a study. He used a technique later known as the relevant-irrelevant test. He tested all the women in one day, presented with a series of yes and no questions. Only some of the questions were related. The underlying reasoning was that the guilty person would have experienced an increase in psychological response questions related to crime. the innocent examinees would display little difference in strength of reactions to either type of question. There was one woman who showed a deceptive profile when confronted. She promptly confessed to theft. He later got skeptical of the accuracy and value of the polygraph in respect of its use as evidence. The underlying reason was that the guilty offender would experience more psychological responses to the questions relating to the crime. The final key thinker I will be talking about is named Leonard Keeler. Keeler was a protege of Larson, who developed the first portable polygraph. He is much more business-minded in terms of marketing compared to Larson or Marston. He reasoned that a lying person would seep more than a truthful person due to the decrease in skin resistance due to a higher concentration of negatively charged chloride ions on the surface of the skin. His new device recorded the pulse rate, blood volume changes, breathing, and in 1939 he actually added a galvanic skin response channel, which relates to the sweat glands. He patented this polygraph in 1939. This is also the first instrument that was purchased by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI. It will soon become the prototype for the modern polygraph. He established the first polygraph unit within the police department of Chicago in response to the spiraling gang war of Al Capone and George Bugs Moran. The final slide I will be talking about is regarding Ronald Reagan in 1983. This is regarding the leak of funding of the defense plan. Ronald Reagan issued the National Security Decision Directive 84, which authorized all federal agencies having to use a polygraph test. This test is mandatory to see if any employees leaked any classified information. It was concluded that the accuracy of the polygraph test in this point of time was undetermined. However, as of February 2015, the U.S. intelligence community authorized again to investigate the members' potential involvement in leaking of classified information and using the polygraph.
Throughout the presentation, we'll be looking at key concepts of the polygraph. So we'll be looking at the accuracy and the pros and cons, different viewpoints like from the media, the field of psychology, and the criminal justice system. We'll be looking at if you can really beat a polygraph test. We'll be looking at the police use of polygraphs, the courtroom use of polygraphs, and the common practice behind the polygraph. I'll be talking about how accurate polygraphs are, the pros and cons of polygraphs, the media and polygraphs, and past examples. Typically, when someone is lying, a well-trained polygraph examiner can tell, but it is not 100% accurate. The American Polygraph Association predict them to be 87% accurate, and in 2003, the National Academy of Sciences did a full investigation of the polygraph's accuracy and came to the conclusion that the accuracy was closer to 75%. The underlying problem to the accuracy of polygraphs is theoretical, so there is no evidence that any pattern of physiological reactions is unique to deception. An honest person may be nervous when answering truthfully, and a dishonest person may be non-anxious. They may appear to be accurate because the subject facing the polygraphs believes the test is accurate, so it makes them confess or makes them very anxious when answering the questions. So going on to the pros and cons of polygraphs, some pros are there's been a long history of it used in law enforcement and military applications. The use of it has been challenged in court, but in some cases it is allowed. The cost of technology has decreased due to competition in the marketplace. The polygraph process is well known due to exposure in the media, and the American Polygraph Association has a strong foundation who lobby on behalf of the technology. And some cons, popular use by the public and reality TV has diminished its reputation. It's subject to countermeasures, false positive, false negatives, and inconclusive results. And the accuracy rates can vary from 50% to 87.5%. The examination is lengthy and requires a subject to remain still while hooked up to numerous sensors. And the polygraph examiner training is expensive. It requires a 1-year internship, but there is no recertification option to determine continuing compliance. The media can be a huge influence on how jurors and normal citizens see the use of polygraphs and are influenced by it. So lie detector tests have become a popular cultural icon, from crime dramas to comedies to advertisement. And there was one study that looked at whether the use of polygraphs in TV shows and movies give an unrealistic idea of how the criminal justice system truly uses the scientific methods in analyzing evidence. Given the increased exposure of popular culture to the polygraph and its portrayal, prospective jurors may have more developed preconceptions on the instrument and its effectiveness today. Because of that, they are rarely admitted in court. In another study, they looked at the effects of jurors' decision-making from the impact of polygraphs. So they manipulated the severity of the crime by one of four ways. So either by divorce, driving under the influence, DUI of narcotics, or vehicular homicide. And they looked at whether there was no polygraph evidence or a failed polygraph test. The results found no significant evidence for DUI of narcotics, or vehicular homicide. But in the divorce category, there was a significant difference found, with more jurors believing the offender was guilty when a failed polygraph test was evident. So the past examples of the use of polygraphs, it's not used in many criminal cases anymore just because of its reliability. But in this case, R versus Oikel, there was an investigation of 8 fires, and he was aware that the interpretations of the polygraphs results were not admissible, but anything that he said was admissible. So he ended up failing the test, and after that, he was interviewed by another police officer and actually ended up confessing to setting the fires to that police officer. And there's a Netflix documentary called The American Murder, The Family Next Door, and it's about a man who ended up killing his wife and children. So Chris Watt's wife and children went missing, and they performed a polygraph on Chris, and he ended up failing, and then that led to him admitting that he killed his wife and 2 children. So even though polygraphs are not reliable, whether they passed or failed, they can be reliable since they can make the offender confess.
Hello, this is Emilia speaking now, and we'll be going over the field of psychology's beliefs on the use of polygraphs. In overview, a vast majority of psychologists do not believe polygraphs to be a valid source of measure in the determination of truth and dishonesty, as exemplified through Dr. Leonard Sachs when he argued that the idea we somehow have the ability to test a person's level of honesty is more myth than reality. This comes from the fact that so-called lie detection involves uncovering a deception through an analysis of various psychological responses to a structured but unstandardized series of questions. However, the polygraph was initially supported only due to the fact that early theorists believed deception required real and measurable effort, which would be shown within the human body and mind, and as a result could be assessed by monitoring psychological changes. But this is yet to be proven, and general research on the nature of deception remains limited. So presently, a majority of the field of psychology is against the use of polygraphs because without a better theoretical understanding of the mechanisms of how deception functions, it cannot be developed or validated. However, they also speculate that the development of lie detection technology seems highly problematic. However, polygraph technology continues to be used within the criminal justice system. Although most courts do not accept the validity of polygraph tests, but they continue to be used in non-judicial settings. This usually occurs in specific situations, such as screening personnel in general, but more specifically, a polygraph test is often administered during the recruitment stages of an officer. This isn't a requirement of North Bay Police, however it is for a lot of other police forces, including RCMP and OPP. Another situation polygraphs are used is for the purpose of testing a suspect or witness's truthfulness during an interview or statement. It is also administered to monitor criminal offenders on probation. In my opinion, it's quite strange that they are relied on so prominently in non-judicial settings when they are inadmissible in courts. However, this will be discussed in further detail later on in the presentation. And just to compare, overall both psychology and formal judicial settings are against the use of polygraphs and do not trust its validity. The question is, can you really beat a polygraph test? Evidence suggests that countermeasures used to disrupt the readings of polygraph tests could possibly be effective. In 1945, Reed, the inventor of the control question polygraph test, was the first to explain how it could be beaten. He suggested the technique is for the examinee to artificially change their normal reaction for the control questions by some means of covert self-stimulation, so that all readings are the same. Reed gave a number of varying ways to practice this technique, including pressing down your free arm on the arm of the chair, flexing your glutes, clenching your toes, biting your tongue, or concealing a nail in your shoe and pressing on it at the right times. Reed proved that the effect of such countermeasures could not be distinguished in a polygraph chart from normal. He did, however, suggest a solution to decrease the likelihood of these tactics working. He stated that by using a special tambour-mounted chair that detects subtle pressures or movements by the examinee, the ministers would become aware of the dishonesty. Although this is yet to be used, but it could very well detect all forms of misrepresentation of the examinee. A reason this hasn't been used could be seen as a result of the fact that many polygraph administrators are confident that the polygraph cannot be beaten, even though there is no solid evidence to support their claim.
After hearing about the pros and cons of a polygraph test, one may ask, why are polygraphs still used if they're not typically admissible in court? Well, a polygraph test, although often inadmissible in court, can benefit the police in investigations. Despite polygraphs not being perfect, they can offer information that allows police to obtain additional evidence that can be used in the trial. Polygraphs have proven successful in varying aspects, such as eliminating suspects, providing new essential information, and recognizing false complainants. Polygraph tests often assist police authorities in obtaining confessions. This can be showcased in R.V. Oakle, where the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that police may use polygraph tests to deceive a subject into a voluntary confession. A confession may also occur when a suspect is confronted by the police with their failed polygraph test results. After hearing about the tactics police use when administering a polygraph test, one may question if they should participate or not if asked. Whether or not an individual should or should not participate in a polygraph test is completely up to the individual. However, since polygraph tests require questions and answered, it is considered a statement, and rules against self-incrimination apply, meaning that the previous statement given to the police may later be used to impeach an individual's credibility if the contents of the polygraph are admitted into cross-examination. With that being said, under Canadian law, silence or refusal to participate in a polygraph test, or give any statement for that matter, does not equal guilt and is not substantial enough as evidence to prove guilt. The right of silence is protected under Section 7 and Section 11C of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Regardless of whether or not an individual chooses to participate in a polygraph test and whether or not an individual fails or passes said polygraph test, the results are not admissible in court as outlined in RVB Land. As stated in RVB Land, polygraph tests are inadmissible due to rules of evidence. Rules of evidence state that polygraph tests violate said rules, which include oath helping, admission of prior consistent statements, and the rules against bolstering an individual's character. As constantly stated throughout this case, the use of polygraph evidence is not accepted as adequate expert evidence, concluding that the polygraph examiner is also not admissible, as it is the role of the judge or jury to determine one's guilt. To conclude, the admission of polygraph evidence often does not serve a purpose which has not already been served within a trial. If anything, it will just add to the already time-consuming process and deflect the focus of the fundamental issue of whether or not an individual is guilty or innocent. With that being said, how the Canadian criminal justice system chooses to deal with polygraphs and polygraph evidence in the future will be very interesting.
The future of polygraph technology. Studies have found that in face-to-face interaction, the average individual is only good at lie detecting to slightly better than 50%. Based on the emphasis we place on human interaction and the perception that an individual is telling the truth in our criminal justice system, we need a more effective form of lie detection, as in the statistically worst case scenario, the polygraph gives a similar rate of detection to chance. And many different circles have proposed a sort of solution to this problem, mostly medical fields in the fMRI, FNIR-EEG, and CAT scan areas. And the most popular suggestion I have found in many different journals would be the fMRI. Scientists first began to use fMRI machines in the mid-1990s. They measure the blood flow to regions of the brain that scientists think correlate to neural activation, as regions of the brain require more blood when in use. This blood flow is referred to as hemodynamic response. They then use computer imaging to separate the brain into units called voxels that contain information relating to the volume of blood in the specific small area, however containing millions and millions of brain cells. It's very effective in the sense that they bypass a lot of the problems present with traditional polygraph testing, such as nervousness or other extreme emotions related to the event. However, fMRI machines are not totally ready to be used as a lie detection method. They are absolutely gigantic and take up a specialized room and loads of money for maintenance and just general operation. There also isn't enough statistical evidence in the area of using fMRI machines as lie detectors to make judgments on a court case with enough certainty that the data being interpreted is being interpreted correctly, as there's not a lot of previous uses to take reference to. There are many companies, however, usually quite small, marketing this or similar brain scan technology as lie detection, and in several states it's being considered to be used in courts. I was unable to find any data about this in Canada, however. In terms of legal issues and implications with fMRI machines, in Iowa v. Harrington, a fMRI brain scan was used 25 years after the fact to exonerate a man by proving he had no memory of the crime scene. This has huge implications in helping review cases and in the sentencing of criminals in the future. With more refinement and better technology in these fields, we could even have more portable machines that could produce more reliable results, and it could even be standard practice in courtrooms. However, as of right now, I was hard-pressed to find times that this was used in courtrooms, as in many cases it is inadmissible as evidence. Brain damage and other neurological conditions could have a huge effect on the outcome of a court case as well, and these are becoming more and more common. However, even regular brain scans aren't being used as much. It is, in terms of legal issues, it is argued to be very invasive by many people, but I would argue that it is almost less invasive than a DNA test, given the absolutely massive amount of information your DNA can show about you, and given that brain scans are usually in and for a specific reason. In the same sense that they will not be looking at every single aspect of your DNA profile that isn't relevant to the case. They wouldn't be looking at parts of your brain that aren't relevant. It's still not really used due to lack of reliability, but with more time taken to gain a larger log of previous cases, I think it could be very useful in courtrooms. There is, however, a need for more laws in place to protect the privacy of the individuals getting brain scans, as we have laws to protect genetic material that is used in court cases from becoming completely public knowledge, but we have little to no in place to protect those that have gotten brain scans. As for the improvements in the field of polygraph testing, the main improvement I would make would be computerizing the interviewers and examiners, as well as the person interpreting the results, as they can change the margin of error by quite a lot. That, as well as taking measurements in control situations to read how the person reacts to normal circumstances and being nervous under other contexts. This would be more expensive and would prolong the entire process, but I feel like it would improve the validity of the results greatly. And in terms of other ways to improve on polygraphs without using polygraphs, similarly to MRI machines, there are FNIR machines, which are functional near-infrared neuroimaging. It is a machine that fits in a briefcase, as it uses infrared waves to measure blood flow instead of gigantic magnets, and it is, however, around the same price, and it is slightly harder to interpret, but overall much, much more portable than fMRI machines. There is also EEG, or electroencephalography. That measures the electrical activity emanating from the brain. Versions of this, specifically for lie detecting, have already been patented, but none of them are in widespread use. To conclude, the accuracy of polygraphs is still mostly unproven. There are a lot of variables to control in testing, and there are also a lot of concerns present with the health conditions and any psychological issues that the person being interviewed may have and the effects that they might have on the data collected. As said earlier on, there isn't any evidence that the pattern or any pattern of psychological reactions are linked to deception in any way. And the process itself may make someone nervous, which in turn may also make them seem like they are lying. There are, however, pros and cons. It is low cost, it is very well known, and it is quite widely used. It is also less invasive than a lot of the current alternatives. However, there are more cons than pros, considering the randomness of results and the preconceptions had by society due to media coverage, as it is shown quite differently in popular TV shows and movies than it really is. It's also shown to be a whole lot more effective than it really is. Psychologically, they can be a very effective tool in interrogation, however, as another pro, and can lead to a voluntary confession, and even if not used in a court case, people do behave differently when nervous, and this is a great tool to make people nervous. For polygraphs to be considered a viable source of information and to be usable in courts, however, I think that they need to implement more laws and regulations, or at least advance the field, because part of the pro of polygraphs is that they are quite simple. But it is also, I would say, its largest downside. The simpler the mechanism, the more room there is for uncontrolled variables and aspects of the experiment, as less things are controlled. Morally, I really don't think that they should be used at all. If there's any doubt at all to the legitimacy of the evidence, it should not be admitted into a court case. And really, if the effect that the evidence can have is as great as it is, and a polygraph would never be used to single-handedly determine whether or not an execution would take place or whether or not somebody would be charged, but it would have some effect. And based on the strength of the effect that it would have, I don't think that they should be used as frequently as they should.